You know, I was thinking the other night about summer, about what summer felt like when I was 10 years old. It was enormous. It lasted forever. June felt like it belonged to a completely different universe than August. There was so much time inside it that you could practically get lost. And then I thought about last summer. I could barely tell you what happened. It was gone before I noticed it had started. Now, here is the question that has been bothering me. Did time actually change? Or did something change in the way I experience it? Because here is what's strange. I've measured time carefully. I've worked with it mathematically, and I can tell you with complete confidence that a summer at age 10 and a summer at age 40 are exactly the same length. Exactly the same. 92 days, 2,208 hours, 132,480 minutes. The clock does not care how old you are. And yet, something has clearly happened. The summers of childhood felt 10 times longer. The years of middle age vanish before you can catch them. I want to show you why. And I think the answer is going to disturb you in the best possible way. Because it's not about time at all. It's about what's happening inside your brain. And once you understand it, you'll never experience a day quite the same way again. Understanding why time feels different when you're young could change something important. It could change how you think about the years you feel you've lost, the decade that went by while you weren't watching, the childhood of your own children that seemed to end before you could hold it. It could change how you think about the time you have left, whether it will continue to accelerate, or whether there is something you can actually do about it. And it might answer something you've probably wondered without quite knowing how to ask. Why did being young feel so rich, so full? Why did a single afternoon in childhood feel like it contained a whole world inside it? And why does that feeling go away? These are not sentimental questions. They have precise physical answers. And those answers connect directly to how your brain processes information, how it models novelty, and how it builds what you experience as the present moment. Most people assume that time speeding up is simply a side effect of getting older, an inevitable feature of aging, something you just accept. I don't accept things I don't understand, and I don't think you should either. So let me show you what is actually happening, because I think when you see the mechanism, the real physical mechanism, you'll find it both deeply unsettling and genuinely useful. Let me start with the most common explanation, the one you've probably heard, and let me show you why it's only half the story. Now, realizing that the most popular explanation for why time speeds up is incomplete, this is where things start to get interesting. Most people, when they try to explain why childhood felt slower, reach for what I'd call the proportion theory. The idea goes like this. When you are 10 years old, 1 year represents 10% of your entire life. It's a significant chunk. It feels long because, relative to everything you've experienced, it is long. When you are 40, 1 year is only 2.5% of your life, a much smaller proportion. So it feels shorter. This is a reasonable idea. It has a certain mathematical elegance, and it is almost certainly part of what's happening. But here is the problem with stopping there. If pure proportion were the answer, time should feel like it's constantly, smoothly accelerating, just a steady compression as the years accumulate. But that's not how people describe it. People describe something much more specific. They describe summer vacations that felt endless, Christmas mornings that seemed to last for days, and then, later in life, entire years that blur together into a single, foggy impression. The acceleration isn't smooth, it's lumpy. Some periods feel dense and rich, others feel thin and fast. And that pattern, that lumpiness, is a clue. It points to something deeper than proportion. It points to information. Let me explain what I mean. Your brain is not a clock. It doesn't measure time by counting seconds. It measures time by counting something else entirely. It counts the number of new things it has to process. Think about that for a moment. When you are a child, almost everything is new. Every experience is the first of its kind. Your first bicycle, your first thunderstorm, the first time you understand that something you believed was wrong, the first time someone you love disappoints you. Your brain is working at full capacity. It is encoding, categorizing, building models of how the world works, constantly, furiously, at a pace it will never again sustain. And all of that processing takes what feels like time. Rich processing creates rich time. Dense information creates dense duration. A childhood summer felt like forever because your brain was doing an almost incomprehensible amount of work inside it. Realizing that what your brain does with new information is directly connected to how long time feels. This is where the physics becomes genuinely beautiful. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you are driving through a city you have never visited. Every block is new. You're scanning constantly. The architecture, the street signs, the way the light falls on unfamiliar buildings. You're building a mental map from scratch. Now imagine driving home on the same road you've driven 1,000 times. You arrive and realize you can barely remember the journey. You were on autopilot. Your brain had seen it all before and decided it wasn't worth processing at full resolution. This isn't laziness. This is efficiency. This is your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. Your brain has a limited amount of processing capacity, and over time, it learns to compress familiar things, to run them on low power, to skip the full encoding and just log, same as before. The technical term for this is neural efficiency. The more times your brain encounters a pattern, the less metabolic energy it uses to process it. And here is the critical connection to time. When your brain compresses an experience, when it decides this is familiar, I don't need to fully encode it, that experience takes up very little space in your memory. And when you look back at a period of your life, the amount of time it seems to have contained is directly related to how many distinct memories you formed during it. A week at a new job, in a new city, on a new adventure, feels like a month when you look back. Because you were encoding constantly. Every moment was worth storing. A month of comfortable routine, same commute, same meetings, same evenings, shrinks to almost nothing in memory. Because almost nothing was encoded as new. Your brain didn't experience less time, it stored less of it. And what is not stored is as if it never happened. Now let me get precise, because there are 3 distinct mechanisms that make time feel different in youth. And like the 3 failure modes of memory, they compound each other. First mechanism, novelty density. Here's the analogy. Imagine filling a jar with marbles. When you're young, you're filling a new jar. Every marble is the first of its kind. A red marble, a blue marble, a marble with a swirl in it. Each one is distinct, memorable. The jar feels full of individual things. As you get older, you're still adding marbles, but now most of them are identical to ones already in the jar. Your brain stops cataloging them individually. They pour in without registering. The jar fills at the same rate, but your experience of filling it, your sense of how many distinct things have happened, slows dramatically. Novelty creates subjective duration. Familiarity erases it. First mechanism. As you age, the ratio of genuinely new experiences to repeated ones plummets, and time compresses accordingly. Second mechanism. Dopamine and the reward of discovery. Here's the analogy. Think about the difference between a meal you've never eaten before and a meal you've had 100 times. The first time, you're paying attention. You're present. you're trying to understand what you're tasting. The 100th time, you're eating while thinking about something else entirely. Novelty doesn't just create more memories, it creates more presence, more attention, more of what psychologists call engagement with the current moment. When you are a child, almost everything is novel, which means almost everything triggers your full attention. You are present in a way that adults almost never are. And full attention is the closest thing to stopping time that a human brain can achieve. Second mechanism. The decline of novelty reduces the neurological trigger for full present moment attention. The world becomes something you move through rather than something you experience. Third mechanism. The internal clock itself changes. Here's the analogy. Imagine two metronomes. One beats fast, 100 clicks per minute. One beats slow, 40 clicks per minute. Both measure the same wall clock time, but the experience of duration for someone listening to each is completely different. Your brain has something like an internal metronome, a pacemaker signal generated by dopaminergic neurons that marks the subjective passage of time. In youth, this pacemaker runs fast. Each subjective moment is finer, more granular. You experience more distinct instants per hour of clock time. As you age, and as dopamine systems naturally decline, the pacemaker slows. The clicks become further apart. Each subjective moment is coarser. You experience fewer distinct instants per hour, and so the hour feels shorter. Third mechanism, a literal slowing of the brain's internal time signal, making clock time feel like it accelerates. Three mechanisms, all pointing the same direction, all compounding each other, all getting stronger with every decade. I want to stop here for a moment, because something just occurred to me that I think is worth sitting with before we go further. We've established that time feels longer when you're young, because your brain is processing more novelty, more new information per unit of clock time, more distinct moments being encoded. Which means the periods of your life that felt richest, fullest, most alive, those were the periods when your brain was working hardest, when you were learning the most, experiencing the most genuinely new things, being the most present. And the periods that feel like they vanished, the years that blur into nothing, those were the periods of greatest comfort, greatest familiarity, greatest routine. Realizing that the life that feels longest, in retrospect, is the life most fully engaged with, I find that both obvious and devastating. So here is my question for you. Think of the period of your life that felt richest, that felt most full of time. What was happening? What made it feel that way? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And I think you'll find, when you actually examine it, that the answer surprises you. Now, understanding why this isn't just psychology, but something that reaches into the fundamental physics of how brains process information, this is where I think Feynman's way of seeing things becomes most valuable. Feynman was obsessed with one question above almost all others. What is time, actually? Not in the philosophical sense, in the physical sense. What is the thing we are measuring when we measure time? And his answer, the answer physics eventually arrived at, is stranger than most people realize. Time, at the fundamental level, is not a background. It is not a river that flows at a constant rate, regardless of what you put in it. Time is relational. It is defined by change, by events, by the difference between one state of a system and another. In the physics of general relativity, time literally runs at different rates, depending on the gravitational field and the velocity of the observer. This is not a metaphor. It is measurable. GPS satellites have to account for it, or they drift by kilometers per day. But here is the part I find most extraordinary. Even in classical terms, even before you bring in relativity, time is defined by process, by the number of state changes that occur between two moments. And your brain is a physical system, a very complicated one, but a physical system nonetheless. When your brain is processing at maximum capacity, when it is taking in novel information, building new models, firing new synaptic connections, more state changes are occurring per unit of clock time. In a very real sense, your brain is experiencing more time per second. Not metaphorically. In terms of the actual physical definition of what time is, the number of distinguishable events in a system, a child's brain experiencing a new summer is running through more time than an adult's brain on a familiar Tuesday. The clock on the wall says the same thing, but the physics inside the skull is different. Let me say that one more time, because I want you to really feel what this means. A child experiencing something new for the first time is physically, in terms of information processed per second, living through more time than an adult on autopilot. The summers of childhood were not longer because you were young. They were longer because your brain was doing more with them. And the years that vanish in middle age vanish because your brain has learned to coast through them. Not because you are failing, because you are efficient. Efficiency is the enemy of experience duration. And that might be one of the most important things I've ever said about how to live. Now, realizing that this isn't irreversible, that the compression of time is not a sentence but a feedback loop, this changes everything about how you think about it. Because a feedback loop can be interrupted. Here is something that I find genuinely hopeful about all of this. Adults who are in periods of intense learning a new language, moving to a new country, starting a completely new kind of work, falling in love, traveling somewhere genuinely unfamiliar. Those adults consistently report that time expands. They look back at a year and it feels like 3. They say things like, "I don't know how so much happened. I feel like I've lived more in the past year than in the decade before." This is not a coincidence. This is the mechanism running in reverse. Novelty density goes up, full attention returns, the internal pacemaker gets a jolt of dopamine, and subjective time expands. You cannot get back the nervous system of a 10-year-old. That particular engine, running at maximum RPM on a world entirely new, that stage of development is unrepeatable. But the variable it was exploiting, novelty, is not permanently gone. You can still seek it. You can still choose it. You can deliberately engineer more of it into your life. And here is something Feynman understood in his own life, though I'm not sure he ever stated it this directly. He stayed curious on purpose. He learned to play bongo drums. He learned to draw. He learned to crack safes. He studied Mayan hieroglyphics. He took on problems in biology and computing and art, not because they were professionally necessary, but because remaining a beginner at something kept time from compressing. He wasn't chasing novelty for its own sake. He was, whether he knew it or not, keeping his internal clock running at something closer to the rate of childhood. The most alive people I've ever known have all shared one quality. They never stopped being beginners at something. So, what do you actually do with all of this? Let me summarize what we now know, and then give you something concrete to take with you. Time feels longer in youth because the brain is processing more novelty per unit of clock time. More new information means more distinct moments encoded. More encoded moments means more experience duration, both in the living and in the looking back. 3 mechanisms drive this: declining novelty density, the reduced neurological trigger for full present moment attention, and the literal slowing of the brain's internal time signal as dopamine systems mature. All three compound each other. All three are real, and all three are, to varying degrees, addressable. Now, what do you do? First, seek genuine novelty. Not entertainment, not distraction, novelty. The experience of encountering something your brain has never had to model before. A skill you don't have. A place you've never been. A subject you know nothing about. The discomfort of being a beginner is the feeling of time expanding. Second, pay deliberate attention. Full attention is the manual override for the compression mechanism. When your brain is on autopilot, it is not encoding. When you bring conscious attention to an ordinary moment, really look at what's in front of you, really listen to what someone is saying, you force encoding. You create a moment that will exist in memory, a moment that will contribute to your experience duration. Third, break routine intentionally. The brain compresses what is familiar, so regularly introduce small breaks in the pattern. Eat at a different table, take a different route, have a conversation you've been avoiding. None of these are dramatic, but they are enough to signal to your brain, pay attention, something different is happening. And fourth, and this is the one that I think matters most, stop trying to save time and start trying to fill it. We spend so much of adult life trying to be efficient, trying to get through things faster, to optimize, to reduce friction, to clear the calendar. But efficiency is exactly the mechanism that compresses time. Every shortcut you take is your brain deciding this doesn't need to be fully experienced. The life that feels longest looked back on is not the most efficient life. It's the most engaged one. Feynman understood this, not always consciously, but he lived it. He treated curiosity as a discipline, not a luxury, and by every account, he packed more subjective living into his 69 years than most people would find in 140. Let me leave you with something I can't stop thinking about. When you were 10 years old, a summer lasted forever. It lasted forever because almost everything in it was new, because your brain was working at full capacity, because you were, whether you knew it or not, living at maximum temporal resolution. You were experiencing more time per second than you probably ever will again. And then, slowly, without anyone telling you, the world became familiar. And familiar things stopped being encoded, and the years began to thin. Not because something was taken from you, because your brain got very, very good at its job. Now here's what I keep wondering. We know that time's apparent speed is tied to how much your brain is doing with it. We know that novelty expands duration. We know that full attention creates more of what we experience as living. So the question becomes, is the compression of time something that happens to you? Or is it something you participate in? And if you've been participating, unconsciously, through habit and routine and the seduction of efficiency, what would it mean to stop? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know.